Hello everyone, and welcome to our study of Genesis chapter 13. I want to begin with a story that I've shared with some of you before. You might remember it. 3 sons that had all grown up and become successful, wealthy people decided they want to do something for their mother's 90th birthday. The first man says, well, Mom, she lives in that little old shack that she raised us in. Said, I think she deserves better. Said, she needs a big mansion. I'm going to buy all of the land surrounding her little old shack and build a nice fancy mansion for her. The second guy says, well, Mom, she's losing her eyesight. She can't drive anymore, so I think I'm going to get a nice stretch limousine and hire a chauffeur driver just to take her anywhere that she wants to go. The third son really thought about it, and he says, well, I don't know what to get her, but I'll take into consideration what you said about her eyesight. He done some research on the internet and found that there was a monastery that had a parrot that had the King James Bible memorized. This parrot could recite the entire Bible, and he's like, Mom loves her Bible, and if her eyesight's poor enough she can't read anymore, this bird is perfect. He got on a jet, flew over to the monastery. They initially said that the bird's not for sale, but after a $20 million donation, they happily gave him the bird, and he had it shipped to his mother's house. On the day of her birthday, all 3 brothers flew in, and they gathered there, and the first son gets out of the taxi cab, and he looks at the sprawling mansion, but his mom comes out of the shack, and she goes, son, I thank you for that big mansion, but it's too big. I get lost. It's a lot to clean, and I don't need all that space. I prefer the cozy old shack with all of its memories, but thank you for the gift. And then she goes to my second son, thank you for that beautiful limousine, but I don't really go anywhere. Said, but my friends take me out and we get our hair done and stuff, but we always go as sisters and we go as a group, and I enjoy the ride that we have together. I sent the driver home. He was just sitting there bored to tears. She looked at her third son, but you knew exactly what your mother loved. That was the best chicken I have had in years. Now, talk about an expensive mistake. We would all like to think that we made the majority of our mistakes early in life. Thank goodness my biggest mistakes were done before the internet and before cell phone cameras. But the sad truth is, no matter what our age, we still make mistakes. Now, hopefully, the difference between our mistakes now compared to those that we made in our youth is that we realize sooner that, hey, we've messed up. And then we start to take the proper steps to fix the mistake, or at least I hope you have as you've matured. Now, Abram, whom we've been studying the life of, was no exception. This man of faith, who is the 4th name listed of all the heroes of faith in Hebrews 11, has made a few mistakes so far. He didn't separate from his family and go to Canaan when he was first told to. He let his father lead them to Haran and settle there for 15 years instead of going to Canaan. He brought his nephew along, and then after finally making it to Canaan, Abram decided to go to Egypt during a famine rather than trusting God. Once he was in Egypt, he told a half-truth, which is a whole lie, that his wife was his sister. He was willing for her to be taken into a harem and become someone else's wife, possibly, just as long as nobody hurt him over her. Now, in the last chapter, God used a pagan Egyptian ruler to rebuke Abram for his behavior. And that's pretty bad when you are corrected by someone who worships the sun and worships cats. It's been said that another potential pitfall was set in motion during this stay in Egypt. Among all of the things that Abram gained and was gifted as he left Egypt, a handmaid by the name of Hagar was one of them. And the lack of Abram's faith in God's provision will be reviewed in future studies of this book, I believe around chapter 16. But for now, it appears as though Abram has learned an important lesson, and he's heading back to where he should be, where God told him to go. And I can only imagine the things that Sarai had to say about the events that transpired while they were in Egypt. So let us begin in Genesis 13 with verses 1 through 4. So Abram went up from Egypt to the Negev, he and his wife and all that belonged to him, and Lot with him. Now Abram was very rich in livestock, in silver and in gold. He went on his journeys from the Negev as far as Bethel, to the place where his tent had been at the beginning between Bethel and Ai, to the place of the altar which he had made there formerly, and there Abram called on the name of the Lord. So Abram leaves Egypt, and he goes back to where he was supposed to be. He should have never left, but hey, lesson learned, now he's back. Many years later, a man by the name of Jonah was going to go on a side trip, far away from where he was supposed to be. And a few traumatic days later, he was vomited up on the shore by a giant fish. He was likely the first guy to be able to say he was from Israel and also from Wales. Okay, that was terrible. Just like Jonah had wasted time instead of doing what he was supposed to do, Abram seems to have made a habit out of doing the wrong thing. His trip to Egypt was all wasted time. God would have gotten him through the famine. I don't question that. I don't know how long Abram was in Egypt, but in the 15 years that he was in Haran, he also wasted time. Maybe he was gifted with his son much earlier had he not stayed in Haran. So instead of at the age of 100, he would have had another 15 or 16 years. It would still make him a very old dad, but think how much more quality time they could have had together if Abram would have quit delaying and quit wasting time and went out and done exactly what he was supposed to. Verse 2 tells us that he was very rich after Egypt. Well, he already had a lot, okay, no pun intended, plus his brother's estate after they died. But even though it looked like he came out on top after this stint in Egypt, it would still have consequences, just like all sin has consequences. But the obvious distrust that Sarai must have felt, his nephew Lot likely looked up to Abram, as well as the people they had with him, and that's been damaged. All of the herdsmen, the maids, and the servants saw Abram compromise. Lot saw him compromise for selfish reasons, and none of those around him were able to witness God providing for them in time of need, like they would have had they stayed in Canaan. I can't help but wonder how God would have come through for them. I know without a doubt that he would do it. I just wonder how, because as you see through the rest of the Bible, when God comes through, it's always in a grand style that glorifies him, and they could have had that opportunity had he not gone to Egypt. So there's wasted time and missed opportunity. That principle doesn't stay behind in the pages of Genesis. How much time have we wasted in our lives running from God? Maybe you're running from God right now. I don't know you, and I don't know your situation, but it's possible. I know for sure I wasted the first 25 years of my life running around as lost as a person could possibly get. Even after I was saved, I look back at many compromises and failures and things that I could have done wrong, and all I see are missed opportunities and missed blessings and consequences for mistakes that I'd made. Yes, I was saved and forever secure in the Lord, but I could have done better in the early years of my life. And I'm sure if we're honest, I think we all wish we could go back and just do things better. Thank heavens that our God is the God of second chances and third chances and fourth chances and 490th chances, as Peter was told by Jesus, and more than that if necessary. Verse 3 reveals that Abraham was finally getting back to where he was in the beginning. Verse 4 reminds us that he had built an altar there previously. He should have been on his knees at that altar when the famine started, and it would have saved a whole bunch of headaches both then and in the future, but it's better late than never. The end of verse 4 says, "And there Abram called on the name of the Lord." He finally did what he should have done earlier, but like us, sometimes we end up taking the scenic route, don't we? Or am I just speaking for myself? In Genesis 13, let's continue on and look at verses 5 through 9. Now Lot, who went with Abram, also had flocks and herds and tents, and the land could not sustain them while dwelling together, for their possessions were so great that they were not able to remain together. And there was strife between the herdsmen of Abram's livestock and the herdsmen of Lot's livestock. Now the Canaanite and the Perizzite were dwelling then in the land. So Abram said to Lot, Please let there be no strife between you and me, nor between my herdsmen and your herdsmen, for we are brothers. Is not the whole land before you? Please separate from me. If to the left, then I will go to the right, or if to the right, then I will go to the left. Sometimes in life we get in trouble because we did the wrong thing, and sometimes we experience trouble when we get right with God. In these 5 verses, we see both of these things happening. Before he left Ur, Abram was told to leave his family behind. Everyone except his wife, of course, but he didn't. He took dear old dad, who tries to run the show, and he took his nephew, who's going to have to be rescued every time he turns around, it seems. So this problem in verse 6 wouldn't have happened if Abram would have been obedient in the first place. Now, Abram has many people and many animals with him, and now Lot has gained quite a following himself. If you've ever seen pictures of that area, I wonder how they had enough land to graze for a small flock, let alone these massive herds of two wealthy men. Now, we're not told specifically, but I imagine that the grass was too sparse to feed all of these animals. And it could also be that there wasn't enough water there for all the people, much less all these animals too. When you have enormous amounts of animals like these two likely had, you can bet the landscape looked like locusts had ravaged the land everywhere that they went. They probably grazed it down to bare dirt and drank every watering hole dry. God had intended to grow Abram's family and to bless Abram in this land, not Lot too. So now we see that sometimes trouble comes even when you try to do the right thing. Abram realized he needed to leave Egypt and return to Canaan. That's home now. Not Ur, not Haran, not Egypt, Canaan, where God told him to go. That is home. So when you do what you're supposed to do, you would think that things would go smoothly, wouldn't you? Well, it doesn't always work that way. Verse 7 tells us it didn't work that way for Abram. It says there was strife between the herdsmen. No matter how closely you try to walk with the Lord, the devil's going to try to get you to mess up again. I've had coworkers and close friends tell me that when they try to walk closer with God, it seems like trouble follows them and things start to go wrong more the closer that they try to get with the Lord. Brothers and sisters, we should always expect opposition from the devil, especially if you are drawing closer to God. If you are living in sin and rebellion, the devil's going to leave you alone. That serpent has you right where he wants you, as far away from God as you can get and not even giving God a second thought. But when you start glorifying God and you start turning from your sin, you can expect that you're going to upset the devil. When you're walking with the world, things seem on the surface to be going smoothly. Imagine that you're walking in the direction of a crowd on a New York City sidewalk. As long as you're going with the flow of the crowd, everything's going to be fine. Now, turn around and go the opposite direction of everybody on that sidewalk. You're going to bump shoulders. You're going to get dirty looks. You're going to get yelled at. You're going to get knocked down. You might even get stabbed. Who knows what? But you're going to get conflict. When you're going the way of the world and the way of the devil, life is going to go smoothly. But once you realize where they are headed, you go the opposite way of the world and temptations are going to come. The enemy is going to try to win you back or at least make you live a life of defeat. I remember Greg Laurie saying that he had this crush on this girl in his high school and everything, and she wouldn't give him the time of day. He came to the Lord, and I think it's somewhere around his high school years, and he said that right after he was saved, that girl came up to him and said, "Hey, my parents are going to be away this weekend. Do you want to come over?" And he's like, "Oh, really? Now you're available. That I'm not going that way. Then I've turned my life and given myself to the Lord." He's like, "Nice try, Satan," but that's the way it happens. When you quit going the way of the world and you try to go the other way, you try to walk with God, then temptations are going to come because you're out of the devil's will and you're in God's will. But it doesn't have to end that way. You don't have to live a life of defeat. You can either be a part of the problem or you can try to resolve the problem. I know some people that aren't content with being a part of the problem. They want to be the entire problem, but not so for the Christian. Jesus said, "Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God." And that's exactly what we see Abram doing right here in verse 8. He stepped in with a concession. He's willing to work out a deal to reach peace with Lot and all of his herdsmen. So Abram said to Lot, "Please, let there be no strife between you and me." He even offered Lot the choice of what he wanted. You can pick first. In verse 9, he said, "Is not the whole land before you? Please separate from me. If to the left, then I will go to the right, or if to the right, then I will go to the left." As the head of the family, as the patriarch, Abraham had all the right to do what he wanted first. He could have claimed his place of land first. And add to that the fact that God promised him the land. He didn't promise this to Lot. But Abram valued peace and he valued family more than he did possessions and personal gain. That's a virtue that we all need, especially in this me-first society that we live in today. Let's continue on in verses 10 through 13. Lot lifted up his eyes and saw all the valley of the Jordan, that it was well watered everywhere. This was before the Lord destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah, like the garden of the Lord, like in the land of Egypt as you go to Zoar. So Lot chose for himself all the valley of the Jordan, and Lot journeyed eastward. Thus they separated from each other. Abram settled in the land of Canaan, while Lot settled in the cities of the valley and moved his tents as far as Sodom. Now the men of Sodom were wicked exceedingly and sinners before the Lord. Lot started looking around and he saw the area that had the most water and the most grazable land. Smart man if you're looking out for yourself and being selfish, but obviously he chose the most desirable choice by the surface, by what it looked like on the front. Not knowing the rest of the story about what this decision would cost Lot, you would think that he made a good choice. But we know that sometimes the better looking choice on the surface is not always the best choice. I remember when I got my first truck in high school, I spent every penny I had from my summer job trying to make it look nice. Had chrome wheels on it, dark blue metallic paint, and I remember being so proud when I won in the best wheels category in the yearbook. It was just this beautiful 1979 short bed Chevy. Now, of course, it had more speakers than a truck could have, as any teenager would do, and all of this stuff. And I had chrome in places that there shouldn't be chrome. But I quickly recognized the value of a more plain and reliable vehicle. One day this thing left me on the side of the road. Again, it's actually done that a lot of days. And one of my neighbors happened to come by and give me a ride home. And as we rode home in his dusty old Bronco, he commented about how beautiful my truck was. And at the age of 17, I gained the wisdom that day to reply that pretty doesn't always get you home, as he had just seen that day. The land that Lot looked upon was pretty, and it held much promise, but it had a big sin problem within its borders. And as we all know, if you play with fire, you're going to end up burned. The wickedness of that city is going to eventually draw Lot in, and it will be the ruin of his reputation and his family. So Lot chose the highest probability of financial gain, and Abram chose closeness with God instead of closeness with sin. I heard a story that took place many years ago when a woman wanted a new coach person to drive her wagon. She advertised, and before long she had 3 people that applied, and she asked all of them the same question. She says, "You know that steep cliff just outside of town and that narrow spot where the road just drops off into a gully? How close could you drive my coach to the edge of that cliff without losing your nerve?" The first guy says, "Madam, the wheels of that coach could come within 6 inches of the edge and I would feel quite safe." The second person says, "Madam, I reckon if even one of the wheels come off of the edge of that thing, I could hold the horses and recover that coach without harm or any danger." The third coachman says, "Ma'am, I would keep that coach as far away from the edge of that cliff as I possibly could." he got the job. That is what sanctification is all about. It's not trying to get as close to the world as possible without going over the cliff and losing your testimony. It's about keeping as far away from the world as we can and keeping close to Christ. In Proverbs chapter 15, verses 16 and 17, it says, "Better is a little with the fear of the Lord than great treasure and turmoil with it. Better is a dish of vegetables where love is than a fattened ox served with hatred." Now remember those two proverbs every time that you try to judge something. You know, when I've gone out on service calls before to work on people's homes, I see some big fancy homes, and they got brand new cars and a big boat in the driveway, and I sometimes find myself tempted to start coveting these things when I think about my humble home and the things that I have. But I have a loving, faithful wife who loves me for being me, not the amount of my paycheck. I have kids that can be a bit rowdy, but they love me, and I get to be in their lives rather than working out of town for weeks and for months at a time. I have no idea what life must be like for those people when I feel tempted to envy the things that I can see on the outside, because I'm sure that what I have on the inside of my home is far more precious than what they have on the outside. It's better to have a little and to have God than to have everything but God. I plan on spending my eternity with God, not with any possessions that I might accrue on this journey in my life. That's why we are told to lay up treasures in heaven, where thieves and moths do not steal and destroy, and tax assessors don't overvalue them, and ex-spouses don't sue you for them. Okay, I made up my last part, but it still rings true, doesn't it? No person and no entity and no government can ever take away your relationship with God. They can never take away all of His blessings. Not even death can touch them. So we see that Lot chose to live in this sinful city that made Las Vegas look like a nature preserve for bunny rabbits. And verse 12 says, Abram settled in the land of Canaan, which is exactly where God had instructed him to go. William MacDonald said, Lot got grass for his cattle, while Abram got grace for his children. Who do you think made the better deal there? Let's continue on in verses 14 through 18. Then the Lord said to Abram, after Lot had separated from him, Now lift up your eyes and look from the place where you are, northward and southward and eastward and westward. For all the land which you see I will give to you and to your descendants forever. I will make your descendants as the dust of the earth, so that if anyone can number the dust of the earth, then your descendants can also be numbered. Arise, walk through the land throughout its length and breadth, for I will give it to you. Then Abram moved his tent and came and dwelt by the oaks of Mamre, which are in Hebron, and there he built an altar to the Lord. Notice in verse 14 where it said, The Lord said to Abram after Lot had separated from him. What God had to say to Abram was relevant to him and to him alone. This doesn't concern Lot. Lot wasn't even supposed to be there. I can't help but wonder how different life would have turned out for Lot had he remained in Ur, or if Lot had even remained in Haran. Now I know he would have made mistakes, like all of us do. He's human, but he probably wouldn't have an influence as awful as the twin cities of sin that are known only for their destruction. And he probably still would have his wife by his side. You know, when the Bible describes Sarai as a beautiful woman who even caught the attention of Pharaoh while she was in her 60s or 70s, I can't help but think of how Lot's family ended up. Abram's wife had an hourglass figure, apparently, and Lot was married to a salt shaker. Okay, that's terrible. Lot made his choice. Lot lifted his eyes and chose, but now God tells Abram to lift his eyes and see what God has chosen for him. In verse 16, God says, I will make your descendants as the dust of the earth. Filthy. No, that means numerous. It means uncountable. That's an amazing promise to a man who is now somewhere in his early 80s and he's still childless. By the time he is 86, he will have a lapse in his faith and try to take matters into his own hands again. And that sin will have consequences that will be long lasting. But I want us to look at the conditions that God placed on these promises to Abraham. Not one, Not a single condition. God didn't say, if you do this, I will give you the land. If you will do this right here, I will do that for you. No. Some promises are conditional. I call that more of a covenant than a promise. God made several covenants with people throughout the Bible, and God always kept his end of the deal. But every covenant that was broken by the human party, not by God. So I won't call those promises, because our God does not make promises that he can't keep or that he won't keep. God is not a promise breaker. Abram did not stand out from among the citizens as far as we know. We're told that his family worshipped idols. I mean, we know little of his personal convictions before the Lord appeared to him, but God chose him, and God brought him out of that. It was all God's doing, nothing that Abram did. Abram's not off to a great start in the faith and obedience department either. I mean, it's an amazing act of faith to get up and leave behind everything you've ever known at the age of 75 and to move to a place that you've never seen before. But he's still making a few mistakes. Now, sometimes we do exactly what he did. Maybe not selling out your spouse to another nation's leader for protection, or at least I hope not. But we have all had lapses of faith when it comes to waiting on God's timing. And I'm positive that almost all of us have tried depending on our own resources and our own decision making and our own abilities rather than waiting on the Lord to come through. How did that work for you, by the way, if you look back at it? In verse 17, God told Abram, walk through this land, go through its length and its breadth. He didn't have the title. He didn't have a deed. Abram did not own a single square inch of all of these places he's going to set foot on and look at. But he had something far superior to any deed or any title. He had the promise of God. God promised in verse 15 that that land would belong to his descendants permanently. Even when Israel would later be exiled from their land, which happened a couple times, God promised that they would return. And they did. When they were exiled to Babylon for their sins, Jeremiah prophesied that in 70 years they would start to go back and rebuild, and they did. When they were scattered by Rome in AD 70 and AD 135, the promise still remained. In Deuteronomy chapter 30, we see this in verses 4 and 5. It says, if your outcasts are at the ends of the earth, from there the Lord your God will gather you, and from there he will bring you back. The Lord your God will bring you into the land which your fathers possessed, and you shall possess it, and he will prosper you and multiply you more than your fathers. Many centuries later, those words came to pass. In May 14th, 1948, David Ben-Gurion, the head of the Jewish Agency, proclaimed the establishment of the State of Israel. United States President Harry S. Truman also recognized the new nation on that very same day. Never before in world history has a nation ceased to exist and stayed that way for over 1900 years and then come back as a nation in one single day, still retaining their language, their customs, their culture, and their religion. That is because their God is unlike anything or anyone else. No one is like God. Now, they might have missed out on the Messiah, but they will have their eyes opened in the end. The Bible tells us that. Despite plans to the contrary by several world leaders and all these hostile nations, Israel will still be there up to and including the millennial kingdom in Revelation chapter 20. Abram himself would not possess it, but his family would. And he will get to be there during this 1,000-year kingdom as well. But at that time, when he walked this dusty old earth, Abram had to walk by faith in these things that were unseen, and he had to trust God. Now, we are citizens of heaven. This world is not our home. We're just passing through, as the song says. We can read about the kingdom. We can read about the New Jerusalem. We can read about the new heaven and the new earth in the Bibles that we have. But like Abram, we have to finish our journey under the same sun that he lived, on the same ball of mud that Abram walked on, and we do it by faith. We look forward to the place prepared for us that our Savior spoke about in John chapter 14. It was there that Jesus made us a promise that we can take to the bank of eternity. And I'll close with these verses. In John 14, verses 1 through 3, do not let your heart be troubled. Believe in God, believe also in me. In my Father's house are many dwelling places. If it were not so, I would have told you. For I go to prepare a place for you. If I go and prepare a place for you, I will come again and receive you to myself, that where I am, there you may be also.